divers, and people who spend a lot of time underwater. What's the creepiest, most unexplainable thing you've seen while in the depths? Story 1. I'm a commercial diver, and was once on a job cleaning a potable water reservoir. I'd been in other reservoirs before, but this was by far the biggest at 40 by 80 meters. To get in, you had to open a hatch in the ground. The whole reservoir was underground and climb down a ladder. The hatch was in a corner, so when you were in the far corner of the reservoir, it was completely pitch black, and you just had to hope your light didn't go out. I was about halfway through a 3-hour dive when the batteries in my torch started going flat. I watched the beam get narrower and dimmer until it cut out completely. It's not a huge problem if you lose light, as you can just follow your umbilical back to the hatch. Just as I started walking back, some obnoxiously loud banging started somewhere in the reservoir. I was the only diver in there, so it both confused and scared the out of me. Needless to say, I ran back to the hatch as fast as I could. I ended up getting my torch changed out and doing another hour in the water, but didn't hear the noise again. I still have no idea what it was, but the combination of my torch going out and loud banging coming from somewhere gave me of a fright. Story 2. I've done a number of dives, and the strangest thing I ever saw was a large deep freezer with a heavy industrial chain wrapped around multiple times with about 5 cinder blocks attached. It was very, very rusted, and the deep freezer itself had to have been 30 years old, probably more. This was about 90 feet deep, just off Vancouver Island, Canada. The situation gave myself and the other divers the newbie jeebies. Logged the GPS and depth coordinates and notified the police. We were able to find out what was inside, since one of the divers had friends with local police. 10 porcelain dolls, edit wording and typos. Story 3. You can dive in man-made lakes and check out what's left of old flooded homes and communities. It's pretty dark and spooky down there no matter what, especially when you think of all the big fish swimming around that are barely silhouettes until they're close. My buddy likes to dive in lakes. He said the creepiest thing, by far, is finding cemeteries 100 feet beneath the water in the dark, eerie quiet. For day edit, I asked him about big fish. He said there's definitely down there bigger than he expected, 4 or 5 feet. They're attracted to the lights and noise, but watch from a distance, which is nonetheless disconcerting. Just dark, 2D shapes drifting nearby. None of the monsters other folks are bringing up, though. Story 4. I dive myself, but heard this story from a guarded diver. In 2010, a man took a test drive in a car with a salesman, and in a suicide attempt, he drove the car off the pier into the sea and drowned. The salesman managed to escape by breaking the window and swimming to the surface. The divers were dispatched to retrieve the other man's body. This isn't in the news report, which I have a link to below for anyone interested. Simply through working in marinas at the time, I was able to be part of the conversation with the diver in question. When he got to the car, he said the man was still facing forward, hands on the steering wheel, eyes wide. Had been there a couple of hours now. Where it gets creepy is when the diver opened the driver door. This, combined with the smashed window, caused the currents to flow through the car, and the man's wide-eyed head turned around slowly with the force of it to face the diver. Story 5. I dropped my goggles and was trying to reach down in the river and grab it, but I pulled out a sheep's skull by its sockets. Wasn't as creepy in hindsight, but 10-year-old me was scared. Story 6. I had a dive master that told me once he was diving somewhere and found a full skeleton wearing diving gear with the air on the tank turned off pretty deep down. If I remember correctly, they said they reported it to the police, and it was found out the man's wife turned off his air while they were on a dive to murder him. Story 7. I once went diving in Port Elizabeth, South Africa, where it is quite popular to see sharks. We begin diving, and we're quite far from the shore. There's a cool-looking structure under us. We swim towards it to get a closer look, and I just start getting this cold feeling running through my body. And that's when a shark appeared, and I physically shat myself from fear. Story 8. When I was a kid swimming in the lake at summer camp, I dove underwater, and I swear I saw someone in scuba gear hiding underneath the dock watching us. I told the lifeguard, but he wasn't able to find anyone. Story 9. Not unexplainable, but gave me a bit of a fright. I worked as a commercial diver for about 7 years in the UK, and also some work in Europe. I was working in Orkney, north of Scotland, on the fish farms. One time I swam down one of the bigger nets off Rousey, and it was very dark, very overgrown, and I could see some weird shapes lying in the dead man's sock as I descended. There were a few more dead fish than usual, maybe 100 or so, but underneath them were lying 3 dead seals, big ones. It was hard to make out because they were covered in fish, but one of the seals had a big chunk of it missing. And that's when I looked up and saw a 4-foot tear in the side of the net. I was only a newbie at this point. Fish farm work is generally the best way to start a diving career. Doesn't pay the best, but you get plenty of minutes log, which helps for experience. I told the supervisor, who said, get out straight away. They sent one of the more experienced lads in after me, and he fixed the hole sharpish and then rigged the seals up to be lifted out. Turns out the seals had been killed by orca and somehow got through the net in a panic. Orca are quite common up in Orkney and are the only animal we were told you had to get out the water for if seen. Only one of the seals had a bite mark. The other two got caught in the net. Not supernatural or anything, but I remember a significant shiver running down my spine that day. Edit whoa, more responses than I've ever had on a post. To answer the question about why orcas, I was told by one of the marine environment lads who used to regularly come out on the boats with us, that it's a precautionary thing. Wearing black neoprene and fins you may be mistaken for a seal and become breakfast. To be fair, it's a precaution I was very happy to go along with. We don't get great whites or tiger sharks up here, but I do imagine in South Africa, India, Australia, etc., there would be similar rules. Neither creepy nor inexplicable, but once on a night dive, I had a seal tag along and take advantage of my flashlight to do some night hunting. It was adorable, and the poor fish didn't stand a chance. Also, because the sea sausage was completely comfortable and taking advantage of me, they were all up in my business a bunch, which was awkward because as a rule, you're not supposed to touch the animal for their safety, and yours, in this case, I finally decided it was totally okay to push their fat when they were my way. Story 10. I used to do a lot of night dives hunting for lobster off the coast of California. Would start at 9 or 10 at night. So everything is obviously pitch black besides where we were pointing our lights. Every so often I'd get this unshakable feeling that something big was watching or following me. Sometimes I could quiet that part of my brain and continue with the dive. Other times I couldn't shake the feeling and would end the dive after a few minutes. It's a hard feeling to describe, but I guess I'd compare it to being in a haunted house but 50-foot underwater in complete darkness. Story 11. When living off the coast, some buddies and I would take regular fishing trips out to the oil rigs. We would always have some lines out and a few would dive down and try to spear some mangrove snapper or cobia. Once while I and two others were diving down, checking out the structure, we decided we needed to move due to lack of life around the rig. We all get back in a boat, and as one of my buddies is reeling a line, we had a red snapper baited on. An easily 8 to 10-foot tiger shark starts chewing on it right behind the prop. So close I could have poked his eye out, the idea that massive animal was in the water, so close to me and two of my friends, but no one saw it is terrifying. I bet he was watching us the whole time. Edit grammar. Story 12. Not a diver, but heard from old divers that work for the Corps of Engineers that there's some huge catfish around the bottom of the dams, like the size of vans. Story 13. I got told a story once by a Maori language teacher of mine during my time at high school. We didn't learn much Maori, just listened to stories. A dam in the Waikato, New Zealand had begun to have visible cracks in the concrete on the outside part of the dam, and some drivers were organized to dive down and check the inside submerged part of the dam for damage on that side. While they were down there was the usual debris you would find behind a man-made wall, which prevents the water from flowing as it would normally do if there wasn't a dam there. Turns out what they thought were large logs were in fact huge eels which had gotten to the size of logs due to being prevented from migrating to the sea, where they breed and die. So from being prevented from doing their natural life duties, they just get larger and larger. That would be creepy seeing eels deep down in the water, just floating around. Story 14. Got charged by a mother humpback. Her curious calf had swum around us, and we were between her and the calf. Two of us never saw it coming. We were watching the baby, but our third diver watched her come. She kicked down and swam under us last minute. We didn't see anything until that 60-foot freight train passed just underneath us. Story 15. The story isn't really mine, but from a friend of mine who does night dives. Here on the Brazilian coast, there's a fish that resembles a shark, but it's considerably smaller, called chow. You have to hunt these at night because they're sort of nasty in the open, but easier to shoot when in their coves. So, my friend, let's call him Regis, is about 1 kilometer from the coast, diving near a reef. This thing is massive, and you have to go really deep to get to the slope with the coves. He is descending with a partner using cylinders for oxygen and armed with a harpoon gun, the kind that shoots the harpoon and is reloadable, which is kind of heavy, making movement a tad slower. It's super dark at the deep during the night, and much light will alert the fish they're hunting, so they have to use flashlights that are weaker. Regis said he had a feeling while descending. Everything was off, the smaller fish were absent. There were no turtles, water was murkier than the usual. His partner stays back with the flashlight, and he goes closer to the reef. Regis searches for the coves, but can't find any with the chow he wants, so it takes kind of long. At a certain point, he feels a shift in the water, like something big is swimming near him. Just as the weak light from his partner waves frenetically and goes off, he doesn't know what to expect and goes on flight or fight mode. Except he can't ascend too fast. He then tries to stay at the same level, but he has his back to the reef now. Then cocks the gun with the harpoon and waits and waits, but he doesn't see anything in the murky night seawater. not even his partner's light. That had to mean one of two things: either his partner went out of batteries, or he saw something and didn't want to attract its attention. Regis finally decides to start ascending very slowly. The weird feeling he had got worse and turned into chills. As he's going up, he feels that same shift again and does not hesitate to harpoon whatever it was, but missed. He said he never saw something so big underwater, and it swam fast. As Regis couldn't see much in the dark, he couldn't make out a proper shape, but saw that the thing went deeper near the reef. So he tries to go up as fast as possible and makes out to the boat, where his partner helped him up. Turns out his partner warned him about it with the light, because he saw something abnormally big swimming in a dangerous distance, but couldn't get to him because he felt watched by the thing. They both call it the blackfish, since they couldn't really see what it was. It's said to be as big as a man, about 1.7 m. Regis lost the harpoon in the end. Both of them still dive at night. It's a no-no for me, though. Also, always dive in groups. Guys, if something happens, you gotta have someone have your back. You never know. Edit phrasing, edit 2, thank for the silver, kind stranger. Story 16, I used to teach canoeing lessons to Boy Scout troops at a local neighborhood lake. Super small lake that's not very deep, but the bottom was hella thick with vegetation. The water was dark, so you couldn't see your hands in front of you for more than like 5 inches under the surface. There was a small clubhouse, an open pavilion, and a playground all on the property. When doing lifeguard work in the water during a swim test, my sunglasses fell off my head. I dove down to find them, and I found a sunken, entangled hospital gurney at the bottom of the lake. It took a few people to untangle it, but how the EFF it got there was beyond me. Clearly it had been under the water for years. Story 17, people dive in Flathead Lake near where I live. It is a dark, murky lake. I have seen some large fish like 5 feet long around the edges of the lake. Divers have told me the really big fish, around 8 or 10 feet long, are smart and will not approach you to close, but will stay floating in the murk, just barely visible as ominous moving shadows. Edit words grammar. Story 18, an old WW2 ammunition ship off the south coast of England was full off brass top shells. Most have been taken by divers over the years, and it was now very rare to see them, apart from a pile in one corner of the ship. This pile of shiny brass metals was miraculous, untouched, and remarkably clean after spending years underwater, and you only found out why if you swam near then. Out of the murky darkness, the largest eel I have ever seen snakes forward. Without exaggeration, this thing had a head the same size as a horse's head, full of jagged teeth. I could not see the body as it looped into the dark and deeper into the ship. No one got near those shells. Turns out for years this thing had been guarding the shiny brass shells, slithering over them, making them shine. We found out at the bar later that he was famous in the area, and many people went to the wreck just to see him. No idea why this giant creature was guarding them like a dragon in its hoard, but some said eels are like magpies and like shiny things. Edit, it has been pointed out it was probably a conger eel, not a moray. I'm honestly not sure, as it was years ago and very dark. I have updated accordingly. Story 19, when I used to surf, I spent a good deal of time underwater, whether intentional or not. One day, I went out and surfed that was absolutely massive for me. It was 10 foot solid all day, bigger sets, serious stuff, and it was a very dark, overcast winter's day and raining. You couldn't see above the water, let alone below. At this place, the bigger it gets, the further out on the rock shelf it breaks. So I was at least 200 m from shore when out of the gloom towered an absolutely massive set. Enormous, as big as ID ever encountered. There were only a handful of other blokes out there. The wave was mine. At this point, I wasn't scared at all. No, I wanted to get the biggest wave of my life, so I got onto it, but I just upped the position of my feet ever so slightly, no chance of pulling out, so I tried to go with it. And that is when it happened, the scariest water-based experience I ever had. I fell off, and this thing just took me to town. It lifted me all the way up and over the falls. I thought I was okay, but no, it was just beginning, it just kept pushing me down, further and further. My ears hurt badly. It was completely dark, cold, even in a wetsuit. I came to rest on what seemed to be a very large, smooth rock. I could feel it with my fingers whilst I was pinned firmly to it. I was held there for what seemed like an eternity, maybe 10 seconds, but then I could sense with my feet a ferocious current that seemed to stop at the edge of the rock. It was trying to pull me over the ledge and down. I could hear it. At this point, I was panicking. Seriously, I can't quite remember how I escaped. I have rarely been that scared in all my life. I made it to the surface. I really thought I was going to pass out. I can't remember much more, but I must have paddled in so fast other people noticed. They came to see what was the matter. I just sat on the beach. I could not even talk. I'm getting the heebie-jeebies, even reading my own recollection. Story 20, my story is not very exciting. But anyway, first time diving on Australia and first time diving with sharks. We start descending, and the guide is at the front of the group looking for the sharkies. I'm at the back of the group. Suddenly, I turn my head left, and there's this 6-foot MF about a foot or two from my face. He just swam peacefully past the group. It was a bit creepy, but lots of fun. Story 21. This reminds me of the story of that diver team that found a man who survived for 3 days in an air pocket after a shipwreck. Here is the video of the moment. They found him. They were on a body recovery mission and were not expecting anyone to be alive. But miraculously, he survived for 3 days underwater and apparently had to listen as his crewmates were being eaten by sharks and other fish. Here's a good article about how he managed to survive. I can't imagine how creepy and unexpected it would be to be on a mission to recover the dead and have a hand reach out to you like it did to those dives. Story 22. This isn't my story, but my dad. So when he was in grad school, he did some field studies classes, some of which involved diving in Monterey Bay. One day, he was diving, counting something off of the Santa Cruz Pier, and he found a shopping cart with bricks and cinder blocks and a chain attached to the handle. He naturally followed the chain and found a bare foot wrapped in the chain. He assumed something probably ate the rest of the body, and apparently his friends had seen similar things too. Also not mine, but my dad's friend. He says he was on a shelf counting mussels when he felt something tap his tank, and he looked around and didn't see anything. He figured it was a seal because they like to play. When he was nudged again, he saw it was a great white. He says he thought to himself, if it gets me, I can't outswim it. Now, I don't know if he was actually that chill, I sure wouldn't be, but that's how he tells it. Story 23. I have 150 dive, but can't say I've seen anything all that creepy. But I do have a cool dive story to share. I was diving the Blue Hole in Belize, and we were at max depth, which is 120 feet. It gets weird at that depth. The light level is getting pretty low, and it feels oppressive. You realize you're way down. There are some lemon sharks that swim around the Blue Hole. They are curious and like to check out divers. But they are harmless. They look mean as though and can get 8 to 9 feet easily. At 120 feet, one of them decided to come check out me and my now ex-wife. She was a bit in front of me, but when she saw the shark beelining towards us, she quickly swam behind me and shoved me toward the shark. I was not expecting that, and it took a minute to process what happened, but I felt bad for her more than anything. She was terrified for a few seconds. I laughed about it later and said at least I knew where I stood with her. She is a good diver, but the sight of that 8-foot shark swimming straight at her with a mouth full of teeth triggered her survival instincts. I didn't hold it against her. As I got shoved towards the shark, who was at that point only about 6 feet away from me, he calmly turned to the side and glided right past me, and then went on to check out some other divers. We started our ascent, and I didn't see him again. It was a very cool experience. Story 24, not super creepy at all now. But at the time, it kind of was. On a live-aboard in Egypt, we were doing a night dive in a big group, but with designated buddy pairs in case something was wrong, or in case you wander off or something. It was a simple enough dive. We started from the boat and went straight down there. But as we were starting to go down, I noticed my buddy struggling to descend. So we both surface again, and she notices she lost some of her weights when she jumped to the boat. She had it secured to her BCD, but it was an old rental, and the zipper broke or something. For some reason, the dive guide didn't notice us gone, so he went further down with the rest of our group, whilst my buddy and I swam back to the boat. However, my buddy, much more experienced than I, asked me to stay where I was to kind of map out where the group was. We were fairly close to the boat, so I was never really alone, but still, there I was floating alone at sea when it was pitch black Alabama around me, while my buddy was on the boat getting some extra weights. All of a sudden, I was surrounded by hundreds of fish, clearly being hunted around by something. Super not fun when you're alone and can't really see what's going on. Went on with the dive anyway when my buddy came back, and we found the group quickly, so no harm, no foul. However, after the dive, we were back on the boat and saw a huge group of fish being hunted on by 2 sharks. So there's that. Edit, somebody pointed out that I should not call it weights in English, and then remove their comment. My bad. Not a native English speaker. What is it supposed to be called? Story 25. When I was a kid, we used to go to a place during the summer holiday, which had some very nice beaches, and in particular an estuary with a very wide river mouth. One summer, there was a king tide where enough of the water emptied out of the river into the ocean that you could snorkel quite easily from one side of the river mouth to the other, as it got so shallow that it was only a meter or so deep at the deepest part. One day, I decided to snorkel across from one beach to the one on the other side of the river, and about halfway across, where the depth to the bottom was maybe half a meter, I was swimming along the surface looking down with my mask snorkel on, and a massive stingray passed directly underneath me. This thing was easily 2 meters across, covered in white scars and missing its tail. I just froze in the water, and it felt like my heart stopped. If I had let my breath out, I would have dropped in the water low enough that I would have landed on it. It was so close. I wasn't in any danger, but having a massive creature appear so unexpectedly, so close up, was absolutely terrifying. Edit, to clear up some confusion, the stinger also gone. just a sort of torn partial stump left of the tail. Story 26, not that creepy, but during night dives I saw 3 different octopi. The adult one moved along the coral and changed colors to camouflage, and the baby ones were bright neon colors. They have the best camouflage out of any animal, truly a majestic beast. Story 27, on a night dive in Scripps Canyon, a cormorant rammed directly into my dive light at high speed and knocked itself unconscious. I thought it was dead, but gently brought it back to the surface where it woke up and took off. Story 28, rescue recovery diver here. Every time I've recovered a drowning victim, I get the creeps. Unfortunately, a lot of people are under the impression that every underwater environment is like the movies and there's absolute clarity. That's rarely the case. One evening, I got called out for a young girl that jumped from a bridge. She likely survived the fall in entry. We have a morbid term for what happened to her upon hitting the water plug. I found her with a surprising amount of visibility in relatively shallow water. She was stuck in mud to just below her knees, and you could see the fear locked in her eyes' face. There's nothing peaceful about suicide by bridge. Story 29, nowhere nearly as creepy as the dolls in the freezer comment, but sometimes when diving, I get a super eerie feeling that I'm being watched, where I dive the visibility sometimes isn't that great 10 feet or so I can't see anything beyond that. I actually got that feeling yesterday, and my dive partner was taking a break on the rocks, so I just decided to call it. Not common, but lately there's been quite a few great white sightings, so better safe than sorry. Story 30, this was in a river, but it was very dark and murky due to the overhanging trees, silt, and tannin that turned the water brown. I was swimming along a few feet down when I ran face first into a huge catfish. While it was only a few long to me, it seemed gargantuan when it gazed at me out of the abyss. Story 31, two biggest. My buddy was taking pictures. He wanted one of me, surrounded by a school of fish, so I started tossing out small pieces of hot dog. I was immediately surrounded by so many perch, I couldn't see out. All of a sudden, a largemouth bass snagged one of the pieces of hot dog that was maybe 6 inches from my face. My mask blocked his approach, scared the out of me. Second one was a night dive in very silty water. Visibility was less than 3 foot, lowest I mark. If I can't see my outstretched arm, it is 3 feet. We were near a flooded structure, maybe an old water tank. At about 35 feet, something was flashing from our lights. Suddenly, I'm covered in something, and I couldn't see my light reflecting back. I pull it off my face, but it is still black, and I can feel it touching the top of my head. I try over and over to free myself, but I don't feel caught, just covered. Finally, I get clear. It was a large plastic trash bag. Keep your trash out of the water, please. Story 32, my time to shine. I was an instructor tech XR, mixed gas overhead, whole shebang. When I was a young idiot that was pretty much trying to die, I can remember diving in a spring system in Florida with manatees and bumping into something on the bottom. Manatees just normally chill at the top and are literally like big floating sausages. So I looked down and saw a massive gator tail swish off into the less than clear water. I've done shark dives in the Bahamas, run into bulls, tigers, the whole gambit, but that right there terrified me. Another fun one was I was leading a group off of PCBC on the Twin Tugs and had a bull shark follow the entire time, and no one else even saw it until we came up. That was hilarious to see their reactions. Story 33, my sister and I were recently swimming at a reservoir near our house. The water often gets above the designated levels, so trees become submerged by water and make perfect diving platforms. As my sister and I are climbing up a tree to jump off, we noticed a pair of abnormally large bubbles that kept coming up the surface and were moving in circles around us. We didn't think anything of it until they started moving much farther than they had been. Kind of spooked us because you can't see anything below like 1 foot of water. Anyways, we kept swimming and forgot about it until about 10 minutes later, we had moved farther out from shore and C2 scuba diver surface. Wasn't necessarily creepy, but just unsettling that they were down there the whole time, and we had no idea. Story 34, not a personal story, but one about the lake near where I live. The lake near my home is man-made, except instead of flooding a plain or clear-cut forest, they just flooded a dense patch of wood surrounding the river, trees, and anything else that was there. A combination of this and the wildly unpredictable terrain has led to hundreds of drownings and subsequent death due to sudden drop-offs or people getting trapped underwater. The Army Corps of Engineers refuses to dive on the lake because they have labeled it too dangerous, meaning most of the bodies are still down there, somewhere. There are also local rumors that amongst the forest trees are buildings and homes, long since flooded and forgotten. Story 35, my dad is a diver, and once he found a dead person that was deemed missing for quite a while. The guy was fishing with a harpoon and not a natural English speaker, so I can't use the correct term, and his harpoon was stuck inside the skull of a huge sea bass. He probably died because he didn't measure his breath correctly, and the base didn't die immediately. So he actually fought back and became the harpoon was connected in the belt of the guy's belt. He couldn't escape in time. So he drowned. Point is, my dad discovered a half-decomposed body of a dead person floating like a horrifying flesh balloon. Have a nice day. Story 36 Night Dive off a fishing pier in Hawaii. Lots of fish guts in the water rolling around the bottom. A decent-sized white tip shows up zipping and out of our lights. It's my first shark cool. Then I see it getting more agitated and closer. It split me and my dive buddy, turned, arched its back, pectoral fins down, and darted in directly at Mimi dive light. So I punched it. I punched a shark in the face at about 2 from my stomach. I was freaked out. Finished the dive and didn't see him again, but dear God, I did not enjoy the rest of that dive, and my air consumption was super high. Story 37. I do not dive often, but I had gone to a lake with a couple of friends, and we were all diving in different parts of the lake to look for others' lost belongings. I was bringing up an ammo box I'd found. I looked over to a group of my friends at the dock, and one was holding what looked like a small cloth bag, so I didn't really bother walking over to check it out, and kept diving. Turns out it was a bag full of small urns with the same name on it. It really spooked us, so we figured whoever put it there wants it there, so we put them back and left almost immediately afterwards. Edit spelling corrections. Story 38. About 3 years ago, my boyfriend and I went on an unguided dive in Egypt. We both knew the dive side from previous trips and felt pretty comfortable to go alone. It's not a very difficult one. And we didn't want to hold up a group in case my boyfriend wanted to take some pictures, which can take a while. One of the perks of this particular dive side was a single coral at 38 m. With a 90 chance to find a long-nosed hawkfish, a really cute guy. Please Google it, 1010 would recommend. The normal procedure would be to spend most of your dive at 25 m, make a quick stop at 38 m to check for the hawkfish, and make your way up again. This should usually take you only 5 minutes or something. However, we didn't find him and wasted quite a lot of time looking. At this point, I was getting kind of sleepy in retrospect. This was the first sign that something was going horribly wrong and wanted to finish the dive so I could take a nap on the boat. I basically dragged my boyfriend away from the coral, and we're about to make our way up again until I noticed something. Hidden between one of the rocks was the strangest looking octopus I've ever seen. It was bright red. You cannot see the color red that deep underwater. It's physically impossible, and had super weird silvery eyes. All in all, it looked super funny, and we were both laughing at its stupid face. My boyfriend makes quite a few pictures, until his computer goes apes hit and basically forces us to slowly ascend and make 3 deco stops along the way. That finally snapped us out of it, because we did not intend to make a deco stop, let alone 3. We finally reached the surface with only 20 bars left in our oxygen tanks, a huge no-go. You should always have at least 50 on reserve, and are still absolutely blown away by that strange octopus. We've never seen something like this before, and change our equipment ASAP, so we can look at the pictures. Except, when we go through the pictures, there's nothing, just 20 pictures of one single rock, no octopus or anything in sight. The rock wasn't even a strange color, and that's when it dawned on us the depth, the time, our strange behavior underwater. That sounded a lot like nitrogen poisoning. You should know, the longer you spend at great depths, the more likely nitrogen poisoning becomes. It's basically an anesthetic that first makes you high and delirious until you pass out, and underwater is basically the worst place to pass out, ever. So here we were, at 38 m, giggling at a rock without a care in the world, basically tripping on nitrogen with our oxygen running dangerously low. I'm pretty sure if it weren't for our computer, we would have passed out and died. We still can't explain how we both saw exactly the same thing, though TLDR basically had an LSD trip underwater. Would not recommend. Story 39, an unending void. That's when I quit and was like, I spent 5 years getting certificates, but apparently being afraid of heights also works underwater. Story 40, I actually have a decently good, maybe somewhat relatable story. About 20 of us, including both grooms, are going on a co-ed snorkeling trip as part of their bachelor weekend. The one groom acts like he isn't afraid of anything even though he will jump when scared. So, one group goes ahead on their own pontoon boat, and our boat comes along next. I have intentionally secured with the captain to have our boat go slower. I am just shooting with him. It was my job to keep him distracted anyways we show up to the site. Without that groom realizing it, they intentionally set him up to swim in a specific direction. Yeah, they had put a mannequin under some rocks. It still makes me giggle. He freaked me out, wrote the whole Dateline episode. And yes, he was a fair as target. He's also a prankster. The best part was he had suspected, but he said to me, I just never thought you would do that. He once borrowed his friend's baby to lie to me and say him and his partner had adopted. I was so happy. So, yeah, I felt it was fair.